front end of my life, what I've been doing actually now for 30 years. I just got plopped into the middle of Central Intelligence Operations so many years ago, not intentionally. It was a merger of a business that I had, and these crazy guys were, in fact, the intelligence suppliers of weapons for the intelligence community that I actually merged with. Their intent to use my business as a front, a covert front. What happened, I was going over several different things, doing some other investigations, and it dawned on me that there was huge amounts of money being stolen, vanishing. Now, I'm not talking about the regular multi-millions that these people that had the ability to dip into our money, that they steal it on a regular basis to build new homes in Paris or whatever they do with their money. But it had reached a point where it was multi-billions and trillions. I watched Donald Rumsfeld, in charge of the Defense Department, step before the Congress on the day before the 9/11 event. And he admitted that he had $2.3 trillion vanished from the Defense Department that he couldn't track. And I thought, wow, gee, I was watching the actual testimony with Congress, and I thought, whoa, what did he just say? 2.3 trillion, and they're trying to find it? And he said theoretically it was over a period of time, maybe an eight years or something like that. But I thought, holy mackerel, that was outrageous. And of course, being the day before the 9/11 event, the subject never came up again. That was the end of it. So the 2.3 that they had admittedly lost remained in the lost category. Short time later, the lady who was in charge of auditing the international funds, the Federal Reserve and their international funding, she said that apparently in answer to a question by a congressman, he said it had been rumored that $9 trillion was unaccounted for. And she said, well, yeah. She said they hadn't really looked into that too seriously, but that appeared that there was about $9 trillion off of the books of the Federal Reserve. And so then, of course, the congressman said, well, hey, it would be nice if you would look into that and get back to us. And she promised that she would. I don't believe she ever did, but at least she said that she would look into it. So that was $9 trillion out of the Federal Reserve. The basics on that was that they had put it out to foreign banks, but just didn't know where it was on that particular afternoon. So I started saying, what in the world is going on? Something's really strange. So I started looking in other budgetary areas that you normally don't get into, and I had the connections to do that, and I started snooping into that. And then somebody came to me, and I was talking also simultaneously about the fact that there was multi-millions of weapons being purchased and bullets to the tune of billions in quantity, enough to fight 3 or 4 different wars. And all we were doing at that time is like what we're doing now, chasing a handful of people around in the desert. So I couldn't quite figure that out, where all that money was going for weapons, and that included weapons being bought by the forest rangers, the Social Security Administration, and that was at least the name under which these things were being ordered. So anyhow, one thing led to another, and somebody came to me and said, was I aware of all the underground facilities that was being purchased or being created, built, changed, and altered, and that huge numbers of gigantic underground facilities? Well, I was aware of that going all the way back to the early 90s, when I had people coming to me with photographs and coming to me with some brief footage of underground facilities so large that 18-wheelers were able to cross at intersections, 2-lane highways under the ground, and magnetic levitated trains being put in underground. And this is one of these things, along with 10, 15 investigations that had been brought to my doorstep, and I just put it on the back shelf, because it was something was going to take me an awful lot of additional effort, and I just said, well, I'm not going to get into it. Let me just stay away from that. But now that was brought back under my nose, and I got thinking and doing more inquiry in a lot of directions as to what would it take to really scare let's say the elite limited few that have their hands in our pockets, but what would it take to scare them so much that they would start putting multi-million tons of dried foods underground? Why would they be buying all this weapons? What is it that possibly could cause them to have such fear? And then somebody said, passed some information on and said, hey, they're doing this in Russia and China and several other major nations of the world. They're not all doing it as profusely as we are, but they're all doing the same thing. So now I said, oh, wait a minute. And again, this is what brought in back to the front of my mind was this business about Nibiru. So I started studying that from a scientific and an astronomical view, the astronomy of that thing, because the bottom line that finally lit, let's say the light that switched on, is that this had been verified, the planet X being this planet that theoretically is in a long, way far out orbital, elongated orbit that comes back by 3,600 years was what most of the thought was on it, that the orbit was a 3,600-year orbit. And when it comes around, that was what had created, in fact, Noah's flood, the flood that caused most of the globe to be flooded. So I ended up, all of a sudden, I started having to study astronomy and the science of it and get into the history of Nibiru. What was this potentially? Is this really something that now may be coming back around? And if it is, we're talking really serious problems for the entire globe. But then that also makes sense for 103 is the approximate number of underground facilities in the United States alone. The Russians put out a mandate for themselves, and I believe it was approximately in 2008, 9, 10, around that period of time, that they were going to have 5,000 smaller underground facilities completed by the year 2013. And they do and have done that. They do, for the most part, have completed 5,000 of these smaller facilities, not all as big as, like I say, the ones in America. But the Russians did build one that could handle 60,000 people underground. And again, the timing was all targeting towards, in their case, it was 2013. I started snooping around and found out that the Chinese had also started converting thousands. This is interesting because I didn't know this Chinese history like I know it now. But many years ago, they had progressively, there was thousands of underground tunnels that had been created by the Chinese during their own history. They were created as hideouts and storage and military training centers for secrecy under the ground, into the mountainsides and what have you. So they simply, in most of their cases, they converted and upgraded some of these thousands of underground facilities. So now here we have Russia's got them, the United States has them, and the Chinese have them. And in the China's case, they also have hidden away all sorts of things, like entire battleship fleets, entire major aircraft, numbers of aircraft, but also as many as 3,000 major intercontinental ballistic missiles as well, underneath, inside some of their facilities. Now, in the United States, I found out we had taken NORAD, which of course had been the Cheyenne Mountain underground facility for so many years. That had been utilized, of course, as the military watchdog for us to keep track of any potential invasion of a major country for so many years. They had actually removed everything out of NORAD and converted that into a very well-shielded underground hideout, like we're talking about, for the very elite few that are going to be given tickets to get in underground when the time comes. And when I started looking into Nibiru, the history on it of course was amazing, because it's been out there and predominantly thought of as kind of almost a mythical situation. They had written it up very seriously in like Life magazine and Reader's Digest in about the 1959 to 63 period of time, and they had said that it had been found, but that in a worst case situation we probably didn't have to worry about it for about 50 years. And apparently that was fairly accurate. And also, it was obviously put on the back burner for everybody, saying, well, we don't have to worry about it for 50, 60 years. I'm not even going to be around, so let's not even be concerned with it. But all of a sudden now, again, it appears that it was around 1983 when a report came in and was handed to Ronald Reagan, and he was told, this thing is coming back, and it is real, and we're doing studies on it now, and if, in fact, it comes back, it's going to wreak havoc on the world. And for those people that are old enough to remember, that was approximately when Ronald Reagan stepped forward on the floor of the United Nations and made this historic speech where he said, in fact, I wonder how well we would get along with our enemies here on Earth if we all realized we mutually had some type of an extraterrestrial problem heading towards us from outer space. Everybody made the assumption that he was talking about aliens, which of course he may be, but mixed in with this mess. But basically, that was about the same time when, in fact, Nibiru was pretty much verified to be on its way back in. And I believe that was actually the top thing that he was talking about in that strange speech. So,
Bob,
yes,
Bob, let me interrupt you just for a minute.
Sure, please.
You remember, too, at the time, and because this is critical, just as on my website I've cataloged the dead scientists over the last 23 years of being on talk radio. Do you remember when the leading scientists, astronomers, were being whacked, murdered, accidentally, often, and when I say accidentally, that's cynicism.
Certainly.
Absolutely. So can you just address that too? Because, I mean,
sure.
This is so unique, the fact that at the time that Nibiru, the 10th planet, Gabriel's fist, Lucifer's hammer, it had all the colloquial names associated with it, and historically the ancients knew about it. Planet X is the 10th planet. What were some of your sources telling you about, we're talking serious guys getting waxed?
Oh, sure. And in a lot of them, as a matter of fact, that the assumption was that a lot of them were being whacked for other reasons. And now what I mean by that is the scientists. As a matter of fact, one of the worst was I believe it was. Now, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head exactly, but it was something like 12 or 18 guys that actually were involved with the astronomical studies were at a big convention in Switzerland or someplace, and they all got on one of those gondolas that goes across the Swiss Alps there, that wonderful vacation thing. And it fell, one of them fell to the ground and took out about 12 or 18 of the top guys that were really involved with that study at that point in time. That would be that was great for whoever was set out to, they refer to them as mechanics that were put together to eliminate some of the people that were being too talkative. Anybody that might have been potentially in line where they either had a lot of the good information and may be morally inclined to let people know what was going on, those people were being bumped off in large quantities. See, another person that falls into that category, believe it or not, would have been the Princess Diana. See, Princess Diana would be one of the people at the very highest level, sitting in the dining room of the Queen, if you will, and would have been totally aware of what was forthcoming, and also one of the people, the few people that had more morals than political ties. And of course she had that extraordinary strange accident with her car that either blew up and or flipped over and rolled over in the middle of the tunnel in France. And of course that always was left in the air, and et cetera, et cetera. Another person was Bill Colby. Bill Colby was a former head of the CIA. He had been retired, but he also would have known all of this and was supposed to be going back before a congressional inquiry himself within a week or two, something like that. And he was murdered. There's no question about it. Was a professional hit. He was found, said to have fallen out of his canoe in front of his house in a lake that he had his home in front of. The only thing was that they didn't get into too much was the fact that for some reason he had interrupted having a clam dinner that and a $75 bottle of wine on his table, and all of those things were like not even half completed, and apparently he got this mystical urge to jump into his canoe and go out and fall out of it and drowned. So
hey,
he
Bob,
was hit.
Yes, Bob,
sir.
Let me just interrupt something there, because one of the people that's one of the sleaziest characters I've ever met in my life, he's dead now. Tex said point blank, Colby was called out, and he was held underwater by a couple divers. In other words, the divers had been prepositioned, so the sleazy individual, who I'll just call him Tex, said that Colby was called out. And obviously, if you remember too, that all of the talk about him mysteriously drowning, well, that was all BS. But I want you to, if you don't mind, to deal with Eugene Shoemaker, the famous Shoemaker Levy. He's on a road 310 miles north of Alice Springs in Central Australia, and he has a two-car collision. So somebody whacked Shoemaker. He's probably one of the most famous ones. Brian Marsden. We're talking, and people have seen on YouTube, and I'm going to put this link up. By the way, I've linked everybody on my front webpage while Bob is talking about these underground bunkers. He's done an exquisite job of photographs and telling it like it is. But one of the most interesting ones was Rodney March. Remember the guy in the Antarctic back around 2000? He was an Australian astrophysicist, and he died under mysterious circumstances, and that's why they were down there in Antarctica when Nibiru, Planet X, could be seen from the southern hemisphere. If you take the deaths, and I'm going to turn right back over to you, Bob, of all the scientists, actually astrophysicists, astronomers, if you take them all, they all happened in the southern hemisphere. The two most famous ones were at the Atacama telescope, up in Chile. And let me just give this to you and then take it. Astronomer Koichiro Morita and Stephen Rawlings, they're both murdered, and they're all in the southern hemisphere. Now, that's pretty amazing that these gentlemen are all taken out. They're all in the southern hemisphere. It's all over pretty much a 10-year, or actually it's concurrent with what you're describing to the listeners is happening. I mean, right. I know you and I we did a show together years ago on that, but I mean, bring it right up now. We've got the same thing happening again. We've got astronomers and astrophysicists dying.
And also, again, which were the people that I was kind of specifying that I did cover in the DVD is some of these other the powerhouse political people that themselves were bad guys. But see, like Bill Casey, he was another one. Now that was in the middle of back in the. See again, now we're talking. My information was that the serious heads up was about 1983. Okay, Bill Casey, a couple of years later, he was about to go once again before, and he was a CIA chief, all right, the head of the CIA, and during the Reagan-Bush administration, and he had kept his mouth quiet and shut, and he had made a statement. As a matter of fact, as you know, and we're not going to mention any names, but you know a lady friend of mine back in D.C. You had talked to her a couple of times. If you'll, again, I don't want to get into names at all.
Yeah, I never talk about names on the radio.
All right, but you know who? Do you know who I'm referring to? Okay.
Yes.
And she actually had been with Bill Casey for many years. Even wrote his speeches. That's how close she was. And her and I were extraordinarily close. And by the way, she's still with us, thank goodness. And she's older than me, so that makes her older than dirt, as they used to say. Anyhow, well, then we're both in the sandbox because we're both getting in that realm. That's right. And anyhow, Bill Casey had told someone he was called back one more time to go before for a congressional inquiry, and he had told somebody. He said, I'm tired of the whole thing, and I'm just going to let everybody know what's really coming in. And that was a quote, and that either the following day, I believe it was, he came in, had his regular cup of coffee, and put his nose down in the cup, and that was the end of it. And they took him away and gave him a lobotomy at the hospital. Anyhow, within 2 days he was dead anyhow. But they gave him lobotomy so he couldn't even talk to anybody at the hospital. And then, of course... Hey, Bob? Bob, yes, one of the interesting things about that, and again, ladies and gentlemen, I want to give Bob the maximum amount of time, but what's critical, the reason they gave him a lobotomy was simply to cover up the fact, and this was by Bill Casey's right-hand man, the guy that they wrote the book, The Secret Man, about, Frank, and I can't remember his name, but I interviewed him for 3 times, and he said they put a plutonium needle in Bill Casey's sun visor in his car, and they wanted to cover up the intense radioactivity burns on his brain. And that was from that was from the guy. And by the way, I think he is now a bodyguard for a famous Hollywood producer. Very tough man, and I can't think of his name. Someone wants to send me an email. But saying that, Bill Casey and just one more guy that we got to bring up really quick, Dr. Robert Harrington. I mean, one of the guys that was the leading and most outspoken man talking about Planet X, he gets whacked too because he headed to New Zealand. And the point being is that when you were doing your investigations and all of these events were coalescing, I mean, in essence, they were trying to cover up Planet X. And in those days, I was interviewing guys who were, well-placed, and they were calling it Gabriel's Fist. Obviously, there had been a book written about Lucifer's Hammer, but you cannot separate the deaf. And these aren't minor guys with little telescopes. These are the most famous who's who in the world of astrophysics. And when you're talking, and I, by the way, I cover Robert Harrington, cover all of this in my DVDs. Robert Harrington was the head of the United States Naval Observatory and had for several years been feeling and believing that there was this huge body out there with the potential of coming back in. He had heard, again, all of the other miscellaneous stuff, and he actually ended up sitting down with, and it was, fortunately, it is on a video, he finally sat down with a Dr. Sitchin, who, of course, was the linguistics expert who read the Sumerian clay tablets and had translated those tablets, and we're talking thousands of 4,000-year-old clay tablets that, in fact, described the planet X coming back around. And he finally got the phone call that he always wanted, and that was from somebody of some credible astronomical skills, and it was Robert Harrington. And Harrington had sat down with him. They recorded their meeting, and Harrington told Sitchin in his face and on camera, he said, "You have been right all along. I have found Planet X, the 10th planet. It is out there, and people, and I can," and he said, "I know where it is. I can pinpoint it at this point in time." And by the way, this is a long time. This is back in the 90s. And it was a short time after that when Robert Harrington died of what I call one of these instant cancers. He got feeling ill, had not even finished his formal report that he was working on Planet X. He became feeling ill, short time later hospitalized, and then a short time later he was deceased. It was almost the same cancer that Ruby, the fellow that had assassinated Oswald in front of everybody's face, Ruby died of almost the same cancer, where he was feeling ill 1 week while he was in jail for killing Oswald, and trying to talk to everybody and blow the whistle on stuff, and which they were keeping that quiet. But anyhow, he also came down with that instant cancer, where he's not feeling too bad one day, and within a week or 10 days, he can't be talking to anybody, and then he's gone. So anyhow, that was another one. But Harrington was in fact the head of the Naval Observatory for the U.S. government.